was named for him at one time.
We have a town called Franklin, Tennessee.
No, we had there was the state of Franklin.
A large fraction of Tennessee was called Franklin, wasn't it? I had forgotten about that.
They never was really officially a state.
Yeah.
But they named it after.
Only a part of the state of Franklin.
Blunt County area, East Tennessee. Further east.
Was it a fairly large chunk of Tennessee or just a small area? Small area or large chunk?
Large.
Okay. Didn't know that, or at least I didn't remember it. Maybe I never knew it, but it sounds familiar. Franklin, he was kind of a melange, a combination of the virtues of Puritanism without its defects, the illumination of the Enlightenment without its heat, and one person, a guy named Walter Isaacson, described him as the most accomplished American of his age and the most influential in inventing the type of society America would become. He was a successful newspaper editor and printer in Philadelphia at the age of 23, and then he became wealthy publishing a particular almanac. Who knows what that was called? Poor Richard's Almanac, and he wrote that and became quite wealthy. It was very popular, and he authored it under a pseudonym rather than his actual name. He stayed a printer for a large fraction of his life. He was the first secretary of the American Philosophical Society and was its president by 1769. He was a national hero when he was the agent of several colonies. When he spearheaded an effort in London to have the Parliament of Great Britain to repeal a particularly obnoxious act, being the Stamp Act, which he was fighting to have repealed. He was an accomplished diplomat, widely admired by the French as the American minister to Paris, major figure in the development of the positive Franco-American relations, which led to the support of France during our American Revolution. France fought or provided resources for us during the American Revolution, and later gave us the Statue of Liberty, of course. They shipped crucial munitions and things like that to us. At the signing of the Declaration of Independence, where he was present, he also provided some of the editorial review of the Declaration, which was written by Thomas Jefferson primarily. He's quoted as having replied to a comment by John Hancock. John Hancock had said they must all hang together. And he replies and says, "Yes, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." So he's quite the patriot. He became Deputy Postmaster General for the British colonies in 1753, having been the Philadelphia Postmaster for years. After the Revolution, he became the first U.S. Postmaster General for the United States, active in community care affairs, colonial and state politics, as well as national and international. He was governor of Pennsylvania for 3 years, and then he died in April of 1790 at the age of 86. So he had quite a prolific and interesting life, did all kinds of things, and was extremely well known all over the world. So he has in his document here, in his autobiography, a discussion about living the virtuous life. And I want to read a couple of things about the virtuous life first, and then I want to read you what he is saying about this, and then we will look further into it. When most people hear the word virtue, they usually don't think of a strong person, as it were. For example, having virtue or being virtuous is sometimes looked at as kind of being weak or effeminate or sissy among men, I guess. Sometimes we use the term when we're referring to a woman as she's a virtuous woman. We don't often say that of a man. And we know what that means when we say she's a virtuous woman. But virtue is very far from being sissy or effeminate. It actually comes from a Latin word that means manliness. Virtue is the Latin virtus, V-I-R-T-U-S, which is derived from V-I-R, which is a phrase for manliness. Cicero, a famous Roman statesman, spoke of virtue that people should try to live up to, and he had 4 ideas: justice, prudence, courage, and temperance. In order to be a proper Roman, you had to practice these 4 virtues. So in a sense, being virtuous is a call to man up, or woman up as the case may be, to be a responsible person. Franklin took up a challenge by Aristotle to live the virtuous life with particular fervor. In fact, the key to his success was his overall success was his drive to constantly improve himself and to accomplish his ambitions. At the age of 20 in 1726, he set the highest goal, I guess, a person can have, and that was the attainment of moral perfection, which pretty high goal for a 20-year-old. He would get up every morning by the age of 20 and say, I think he used the word good, but I'm going to change the word slightly. What valuable thing can I do today? And it didn't have to be a benevolent thing. It was just, what useful, valuable thing can I accomplish today? Can I do a good job on? Will I get the printing orders that I have planned for today all done today? That would be a good and valuable thing to do. So he always had a goal to do something useful, something valuable every day. And then at night, when he got home, before he went to sleep, he would ask himself to enumerate the valuable, good, useful things that he had done during the day. That alone would be very helpful in our lives, wouldn't it? It would give us purpose each day. Some days I get up and I go, what am I going to do today? I don't know. I don't know. And guess what I end up doing all day? I don't know. All day long. I don't know. What am I going to do now? I don't know. Tyra, on the other hand, knows what she's going to do nearly every day in advance. But anyway, he had the idea of trying to be useful. He even had a schedule every day of when to get up, what to do he broke his day into 2-hour segments, what to do each 2-hour segment all day long. And he had worked, all day, and then at night he read and did all kinds of things. Remember, I told you he was a self-educated person, extremely intelligent, spoke several languages and other things. On the somewhat negative side, although he was raised Presbyterian and was religious in a civic sense, I guess would be the correct term, he thought religion was very important. In fact, he thought religion was so important that he made financial contributions to all religious organizations in his town consistently. He supported all of them. And he often complained that instead of teaching people good, uplifting, edifying things of how to improve their life, they mostly talked about how they were different from other religious groups and how they needed to be separate from each other. So, he wasn't too crazy about that at all. So, beginning with a statement here where he actually says what I just said. He says, though I seldom attended any public worship, I had still an opinion of its propriety. He liked it. And of its utility when rightly conducted. And I regularly paid my annual subscription for the support of the only Presbyterian minister or meeting that we had in Philadelphia. Remember, he was raised Presbyterian. But he also gave contributions to other religious groups. This Presbyterian minister used to visit me sometimes as a friend and admonish me to attend his administrations, and I was now and then prevailed on to do so, once for 5 Sundays successively. Woohoo! Had he been, in my opinion, a good preacher, perhaps I might have continued, notwithstanding the occasion I had for the Sunday's leisure in my course of study. Sunday was usually reserved for reading all day, in his case. But his discourses were chiefly either Ptolemaic arguments or explications of the particular doctrine of our sect, and were all to me very dry, uninteresting, and unedifying, since not a single moral principle was inculcated or enforced. Their aim seemed to be rather to make us Presbyterians rather than good citizens. So you see how he felt about that. At length, he, the preacher, took his text, the verse from the 4th chapter of Philippians. You'll recognize this verse. He's been sitting through this long, boring sermon. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, or of good report, if there be any virtue or any praise, think on these things. And I imagined in a sermon on such a text, we could not miss of having some morality taught. But he confined himself to 5 points only, which he says this is what the apostle meant. 5 points. Keeping holy the Sabbath day, being diligent in reading the Holy Scriptures, attending duly to the public worship, partaking of the Lord's Supper, he says sacrament, paying a due respect to God's ministers, in other words, tithing. These might be all good things, but as they were not the kind of good things that I expected from that text, I despaired of ever meeting with them from any other, was disgusted, and attended his preaching no more. And so he talks about a couple of things. So he comes back to his home, and he says, my conduct might be blamable, but I leave it without attempting further to excuse it, my present purpose being to relate facts and not to make apologies for them. It was about this time I conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. Remember, he's 20, so he's got high ideals. I wish to live without committing any fault at any time. I would conquer all that either natural inclination, custom, or company might lead me into, as I knew or thought I knew, what was right and wrong. I did not see why I might not always do the one and avoid the other. In other words, I couldn't see any reason why I shouldn't just do the right thing all the time. But I soon found I had undertaken a task of more difficulty than I had imagined. While my care was employed in guarding against one fault, I was often surprised by another. Habit took the advantage of inattention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason. I concluded at length that the mere speculative conviction that it was our interest to be completely virtuous was not sufficient to prevent our slipping, and that the contrary habits must be broken and good ones acquired and established before we can have any dependence on steady, uniform rectitude of conduct. So he decides to come up with a method of achieving a virtuous life. Now, when he gets to the end of this exercise, he concludes that it is impossible to do what he intended to do. We already knew that, didn't we? We already knew that it's impossible to live a perfect life for us. But he concludes that he is unable to do it. And he had a real technical procedure. If he had had a spreadsheet in those days, he would have been burning that computer up, because he had all the days of the week and all the virtues. And every time he did a bad thing from a virtuous standpoint, he would check it off and count the number of check marks and keep records and tabs, and was he having less check marks on this particular virtue of doing things wrong. And he says, I got fairly good at a few things, but some I just failed miserably at. And as soon as I got this one right, I would fall into a hole on this one over here. So he says, I really never accomplished it. But he said, it did one thing. I did become a better person, because he paid attention to what was going on in his life. He was trying to be a better person. And he said, I actually got better at some of these things. What would be wrong with that? Shouldn't you try to be a better person if you can? And he made the attempt with the goal of being perfect, and of course he failed that miserably, but he said it did pay off in that I became a better person. And he came up, by the way, I should have been showing this all along. I should have been showing that the whole time I've been talking for his autobiography. He came up with 13 virtues that he thought. Now, he says that everybody has their list, and he says he has his list too. And so they vary from person to person. He came up with 13 virtues that he thought were good. And they are these. They probably would go. So he came up with these 13 virtues, and they at times overlap with each other. So he has kind of defined what he means by each virtue here. Temperance can be a lot of things. You know, that's basically moderation, I guess, in things, control of your desires. But he defines temperance as it has to do with food, primarily. He says, eat not to dullness, drink not to deprivation. I'm sorry, drink not to elevation. My printing didn't come out dark enough here. It's what he says for temperance. And what my plan here is to actually talk about these over the next several weeks in somewhat more detail. And there will be many, many scriptures that you can just go down through that thing and you can just see all kinds of places where scriptures would apply to those sorts of things. It's easy to just, every time you see something, you can throw a scripture at it, maybe many. But anyway, he says temperance. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. That's one I'm going to profit from if I can get that lesson together. A lot. Maybe all of them. Order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. See, there's deep lessons involved in some of this stuff. Not just, pick up your stuff in your bedroom. That's part of it, but there's a lot more to order than just picking your stuff up. Resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Frugality. Make no expense, but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. Industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Hate that. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And if you speak, speak accordingly. That one ties in with silence a little bit there. Justice. Wrong no one by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. In other words, don't do wrong to people and do the good you're supposed to do to them, especially if you have a responsibility to do it. Moderation, which is kind of like temperance. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Now that one is interesting that he includes not resenting injuries as an idea behind moderation. We'll again talk about that. Cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in the body, clothing, or habitation. That's similar to order in some ways. Tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents, common or unavoidable. I'd love to be tranquil, wouldn't you? In the face of a storm. Chastity. His phraseology here is kind of archaic sounding to our ears. Rarely use venery but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another person's peace or reputation. In other words, be a moral person from a sexual standpoint. Humility. Now this one's interesting too. The only thing he says about humility is imitate Jesus and Socrates. He thought highly of Socrates, but not as highly as he did of Jesus. He made it clear that he thought more highly of Jesus than any other person, but he says, imitate Jesus and Socrates. And as I said, he tried to accomplish these things by doing I think that's the end of the slides, if I'm not mistaken. That is the end, right? Okay. I got that one right there. Hello. We're going to actually talk about temperance next week. At least we'll start with that and maybe do more than just temperance. fact, he began his, he did these in order, as you can see. They're listed here. He did temperance first. Remember, he said, eat not to dullness or drink not to elevation. It says he began his list of virtues with temperance because it was the virtue that would develop the self-discipline necessary to adhere to the other 12. Temperance calls us to avoid overindulgence, in this case, food and drink. By conquering your primal urges for food and drink, you'll have the confidence to start making improvements in other areas of your life. And then he discusses other areas of overindulgence in his other virtues. So he's going to begin his attempt with his spreadsheet with temperance. And he's going to do this for a week and see how well he does. And then he will do it for another week and see if he can reduce the number of tick marks. So every time he overeats or overdrinks, he puts a tick mark down on his spreadsheet, or his Excel spreadsheet or whatever. And then when he's got that under control, he's going to go to the next one, to silence, and then to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And of course, you know what happens. As you get more and more on there, the older ones start coming back, right? Isn't that right? And so he very quickly discovers that he can't juggle all 13 of these at one time. But again, he says that this made him a better person, even though he was not able to overcome everything that he wanted to overcome. Indeed, when he died, he was quite obese, which of course means he failed in his first one there. He actually suffered with gout a great deal through his life, and he died rather obese at the age of, I believe, 86, 84 or 86, something in there. I'm going to let that end right there. We've got about 5 more minutes, but I'm going to let it end. And so next week we will talk about the idea of temperance, primarily as it relates to food, but in general we'll probably talk about that as it relates to other things too, but it's going to come up several times. Moderation and those sorts of things will come up under several different ideas. And we'll try to have lots of scriptures associated with each of these. Some of them are just self-evident. Yes, dear? I'm sorry, hon? There you go. Well, how about that?
Nice surprise.
You would have never thought that, would you?
Yeah, I never thought that. Yeah, I was thinking that it was coming out when I read it was ready in the book. And I was thinking of that when I got up this morning. A lot of times you can read a lot of stuff, but you don't understand what you read. And the fellow asked you, do you understand what you read? How can I accept some things you got a lot of times? You don't want no guide.
Don't want a guide? Yeah, I'm afraid many times I don't want to understand what I read. Yeah, I'd rather not understand it. So, do you have any comments or questions on things? I'm sorry for reading so much to you, but a lot of it was, to me, was kind of worth reading, I guess, to me. But we'll talk about each of these virtues as he has defined these virtues over the next few weeks. And hopefully it will provide you with something to kind of stimulate you to think, maybe even come up with your own list of virtues. Like I say, this is his list of virtues. You may come up with your own list of different things that you think are virtuous and good and righteous and you know, worthy of praise, as the Philippian verse talks about, something that's worthy of praise and worthy of doing. You could come up with your own list. And I'm not saying you should do a spreadsheet on it. I find that a little mechanical myself, but if you think about these things, maybe even look at the list if you decide to have a list or whatever, or think about your list occasionally and say, how am I doing in these areas as I progress through my life? And it would be nice if I had thought of these things when I was 18 and looked at them then rather than now, because as I go down through these, there are several that I know I am a dismal failure at. And some of you know which ones those are. In fact, most of you know what some of them are. Silence, not very likely in my case. Humility, not so much. So I have a lot of areas where I could improve in those things. And so it started me thinking, and I hope we'll be able to start you thinking about finding those areas in your life that you could improve and be a more manly man, as it were, and a more womanly woman, as it were, to have the virtue that you need to live a virtuous life. Okay, so we'll have our closing benediction, and then we'll be done. May the Spirit guide you into a greater appreciation of the benefits and practice of the virtuous life to the glory of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ.